Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Breathe Better podcast. Um, Today I would like to talk about a little element of non-attachment that comes up within yoga. So this is something that, we all know that, well, we don't all know, but non-attachment is a very, very big deal within yoga. So it's not to be attached to the sort of end result of our actions or our desires or anything like that. And this is a big thing within Patanjali's methodology of yoga as well, or in the Yoga Sutras, is that we're essentially working to reduce our desires so that we don't have any anymore. And that's at the core. That's kind of what Patanjali's yoga is. And that's not really something that's talked about an awful lot nowadays, because it doesn't really fit in with the modern aspect of yoga. And now something that I was actually teaching and sharing this week in one of my in a meditation session was that when we're looking back at yogic texts, we have to take into account the context, or when we're looking at the context of it, we have to take into account the era and the time that we're reading it from, or that it's estimated to have been written. So when you look at the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he's talking about yoga in his lens is sitting and meditating. That's the asana that he's talking about, is literally the seat that you are sitting in. And you'll know yourself, if you're uncomfortable in your body, if you have aches or pains, or if you tried sitting cross-legged for any length of time, you'll notice that your back starts to ache, or your shoulder starts to feel sore, or you notice these tensions that start to arise. So when he's talking about being steady and comfortable in asana, sthira and sukham, he's talking about in a seated position. And I think in Vyasa's commentary, so the first commentary that was made of the Yoga Sutras, Vyasa does outline a couple of postures, a couple of seated positions, to sit in. And, but the main bulk of practice that he's talking about is sitting and meditating and focusing and concentrating on certain things. So in essence, he's obviously talking about meditation and focusing on a certain object, and he does offer several objects to meditate on and to focus on, be that a mantra or the breath or the lengthening and expansion of the breath, or of the divine, or any image of God or anything in that nature. So yeah, he offers a couple of different things, but meditation being the key practice. So one thing that I really like to try and share a lot about is the fact that meditation and pranayama are very much key aspects of yoga. In the way that I teach it, of course, and in the way that I teach it. And I do believe that if we're following the Yoga Sutras and drawing knowledge from them, then we need to have this as a base practice. Really, we really need to incorporate these things and not just focus on movement. Like, yes, a lot of the stuff that Patanjali talks about can be related to movement in some elements, in some of the sutras, but a lot of it's to do with understanding the self. So bringing everything back to this non-attachment. So obviously we talk about non-attachment in yoga, not being attached to the fruits of our labour, so to speak, but enjoying the process and learning to enjoy the process. So not being so fixated on getting into a certain posture, or not being so fixated on, I don't know, being able to hold your breath for a certain amount of time, or sit in a position for a little bit longer, or feel a little bit more comfortable in that position. And there's a little bit of a conflict that can arise here, because it even gets to the point when I've had people coming to my classes who don't want to celebrate the little wins that they get, like being able to sit cross-legged comfortably. Like, that's huge. And I actually had a little impromptu one-to-one this week, mainly because one of my regular people who comes to the class, no one else was there this week, so it was just a little one-to-one. And we were sitting talking, and she was like, sort of relaying back to me that she didn't really want to point out the fact that she felt like a little bit more comfortable in some positions. But that's a big win. That's really good. Like, that's amazing. And so we had a little bit of a chat about it. But and I won't go too much further into detail about it, but you know, this is something that I have experienced so many times. Is like finally being able to hold a position or get into a posture or just feel a little bit more comfortable in my body in certain positions, which didn't feel comfortable before. They felt like absolute hell. Like some positions feel like absolute hell, let's be honest. Not in a painful way, but just in like it's hard to soften into them, you know? It's hard to soften the edges. It's hard to find that balance between effort and ease. And that's really difficult in some positions. And it's really difficult in yoga because a lot of the positions are quite our bodies can be quite tight and they can be quite stiff. So it's good to be able to enjoy the process instead of just being so fixated on the end result, because there is no end result. The end result is just the same position, essentially, but just with a little bit more flexibility around it. Like, there is no ideal position. The position's completely relative to each individual person. Some people might not ever be able to get into certain positions because of the way that their skeleton is made up. And that doesn't make it any less of a position or any less deep or any less fulfilling. It's just different. So this idea of not being attached to the end result or this image that you've created in your head, this idea that you've created in your head over what this position should look like, and it's not necessarily just the individual's fault, it's social media and how it's been portrayed and how it's been taught. Potentially as well. So there's a lot of variables and a lot of factors that come into play when you're thinking about how a position should look, essentially. Now I'm talking a lot about positions here because that's very relevant for non-attachment as well, because that's the main thing that we do in yoga nowadays, isn't it? Is we practice positions when we do flows and stuff like that. So it's finding the balance of being able to celebrate the little wins, like being able to sit cross-legged, for example, like comfortably for a little bit longer. That could be massive for someone. So it's not to be like washed down or dumbed down at all. Like, we need to celebrate the little things in our lives to really appreciate it, and be grateful and appreciate things a little bit more. And the more and more that we do that, the more and more joy we might find in our lives, as opposed to just, constantly like, it's not about that. It's not about that. We can't be too attached to it. Like, it's not, I like fuck off. Like that. So let's celebrate some fucking little wins here and there. We have to, if we want to experience a little bit of joy and like appreciate the lives that we're living. We can't just have such a strict idea of not being attached to this life within this realm. That's just a bit silly. But yeah, this also goes for non-attachment. Also goes for like our ideas about ourselves. So, like, not being enough, for example. Like, if we have this idea that we're not enough, we need to somehow release our attachment to that idea, and we need to find a way around it so that we can actually believe in ourselves and we can actually think that we're capable of really great things. And how do we do that? By celebrating little things about ourselves, by changing the narrative. So maybe it is like celebrating the fact you can sit cross-legged, or you're a little bit closer to getting your splits because you're putting in the work. Like, you're showing up for yourself, and that's a lot. That you're showing yourself that you're worthy every single time. You're showing yourself that you're capable of being loved and celebrated, and that you deserve good things because you're the one showing up for it. But the narrative, our narrative to ourselves has to relay that information. If we're continually beating ourselves up and saying that we're not good enough, or we're not quite there yet, or we're never going to get into that position, or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves, then that's just going to, cement that idea that we are not enough, or we're not capable of doing that, and we don't deserve love, or we don't deserve good things, we just deserve bad things, and we're not capable of this, and yada yada yada. You kind of get where I'm going. So non-attachment, not just about postures, obviously, it's about ideas. Now, our egos love ideas, they love the narrative, they love the story, and the ego isn't necessarily a bad thing. Over-identification with it and feeding it is a bad thing. So the ego really loves to be told that it's good, but it also really loves to be told that were shit, or certain people's do anyway. If you have depression, you'll probably be very familiar with a very negative narrative in your head that just berates you constantly, and you just can't really escape from it. So you'll be quite familiar with that. But the ego also obviously loves to be boosted. It loves people telling us that we're good at something, or we're good looking, or they like our, just the script. And the ego loves that. And the ego isn't something that we can ever escape. It's kind of a necessity within this physical body that we're inhabiting, that we need to have an ego. And I'm never one for saying that ego death is a thing. I don't know if I fully believe that ego death is a thing. I do believe that there is a realm that you can access, an altered state of consciousness where you're not in touch with your ego. However, when you come back to reality, this reality that we're living in, your ego's still there. And all of these identifications, all of these narratives are still there. You might get a little glimpse of the cosmos from a little bit of or the divine, or whatever you want to call it, or just the self, or source, as I like to call it. And you might get a little glimpse of that source, where it's just nice and quiet and still and silent. And it's very rare, can I just say, from my experience, to get little glimpses of that. And the thing is, when you experience these things as well, guess what happens? You get attached to the idea of getting back there. It's like a nice feeling. And if anyone's ever suffered from addiction or substance abuse or anything like that, it's a similar kind of thing. You get a nice little high, you get a nice little feeling of peace, and then guess what? You want to go back there. And guess what? The more you yearn to get back there, the harder it's going to be to get there. Because that's part of the process. The more we yearn for stuff, the more we're attached to the idea of it, the harder it gets to achieve it. And the harder it gets to get there. Within some context. Sorry, the cat's climbing all over me because she wants to get fed. And I'll feed her in a minute, don't worry, I'm not going to neglect her. But, so non-attachment's a big topic. And we can explore it a little bit within materialism as well. And one of the wonderful stories that I got told was about certain, I think, and don't quote me on this, but Buddhist lineages that when they got sort of, not ordained, I don't quite know the right word, but once they went into the ashram, so to speak, or shala, or whatever it is that they called it, that they were asked to, the usual sort of stuff, shave their head and get rid of all their belongings. And the most important thing that really stuck with me was give away something the item that holds the most value to them, like sentimentally. And I just remember thinking, wow. And the first thing you can think about is how much you'll miss that thing. And if you can think of something that you hold really dear to yourself nowadays, I have a watch from my grandfather gave me when he passed away, and I can't ever imagine giving that away to someone. Yet, I probably could. I wouldn't feel good about it, and I'd probably resist like hell because I don't want to give it away. I want to hold on to that for a very long time, if not forever. But then we think, why? Why do I want to hold on to that watch? It holds sentimental value for me, and it feels like it's like a connection between me and someone that's passed. A connection that, is sort of essentially fades over time, and having something like that, a physical object, helps me feel connected to my granddad in a way. And it's like a little reminder that he was there, and all of the things that he'd done for me, and my obsession with all of the watches that he had when I was growing up, and how I always used to try and steal them and put them on my wrist and stuff, and obviously they didn't fit. And ironically, I tried to get the watch resized, and I can't, because the screws inside are so old and so decayed that I can't get it resized. So the funny thing is that the watch that he gave me as an adult still doesn't fit my wrist, just like it did when I was a kid. And that to me is, that's very, it brings up a lot, and it's nice. It's a nice thought, and it's a nice feeling, and it's a nice connection that I have to this watch and to my granddad, obviously. But I couldn't imagine giving it away. But when you think about it, in a different sense when you open your mind a little bit. So you're not just thinking like of the bad, right? So I'm essentially, when you think about giving something away like that, you'd be like, well, I'm going to miss it and I'm going to lose it. But it's never technically ours. Like, we don't own anything. Nothing that is in our possession is technically ours. Like, nothing can be technically ours. It just happens to come along for the ride with us. Like, all of this stuff in your home, and might be a grim thought, but once you're not there anymore, it's like, it's not yours anymore. Once we pass away, it was never ours in the first place. It just goes on to someone else, or unfortunately goes to landfill, or it gets recycled or upcycled, it gets passed on to someone else, and then it's someone else's. It's just ours for the journey. It's not technically ours, if you know what I'm getting at. Like, nothing that we own is ours. Like, our body is ours, our thoughts are ours, our emotions, our sensations that we feel, our states of consciousness, they're all ours, but nothing material is ours. So let's, not get too attached to the idea that stuff is ours and that it's only ours. And I think this is really big nowadays. It's like, no one likes to share, right? Like, we hoard on to so much just because we have this idea that it's ours, and the more stuff that we have, the more value we have, and that's bollocks. It really is. Sometimes it isn't until you lose everything that you realize how much value you really have in yourself, and how much value yourself has, and how much value a stable, good relationship with yourself, how much impact that has. So yeah, thinking about giving away something really sentimental, but in turn of it feeling quite negative to start with, there's also the other side of it, which is like, you're giving away something to someone else which has so much meaning and so much value and so much love almost, but you're giving that to someone else. It might not have the same sentimental value, but it could, you giving it to someone. Say you gave something to someone, like, say I gave this watch to a homeless person who had nothing, absolutely fucking nothing, hardly had any clothes on his back, and I gave him this watch. That could mean a hell of a lot to that person. Not just the watch, but the act of kindness. That act of, like, giving something up that means so much to me, to him, because he has nothing. That could be massive, like, absolutely fucking massive. So that's something to think about, and something to reflect on. So, as we were talking about, non-attachment, many different variables, materialism, objects, the fruits of our labours within yoga, the postures, maybe it's an idea about ourselves, like we want to have this career or that career, and that's going to define us or whatever. And another way that shows up for myself is this idea about ADHD, right? Like, I'm still waiting for a diagnosis over ADHD, and I know I have it, but I once had this I still have this conflict about, like, well, how much does this mean to me? Why am I so attached to this idea or this validation that I have ADHD? Why am I so attached to someone else telling me that I have ADHD? Why am I so attached to this diagnosis when I know within myself that I have it, and that should be enough? And why is it so important to me? And in reflection, it's like, it's a validation for me, right? It's a validation that I have gone 28 years managing something like this, like ADHD, all the anxiety, all the depression, the way that I am, this and that, could be because of this. Like, especially the depression and anxiety. Like, oh, right, yeah. Or that feeling of not really belonging anywhere. Like, oh, yeah, that makes sense because of the ADHD. So it's a validation for me, right? And even now I feel validated in the sense saying, like, yeah, I know this is to be the reason. Like, I'm 28 and I'm just discovering that I have ADHD, or 27 when I first sort of started pondering it. But I genuinely do believe, like, yeah, this is it. And it's just a validation, like, why I found things so fucking hard this whole time. Why I find being normal, quote end quote, so fucking hard. Why I find socializing so hard. Why I find it so draining. Why I get so overstimulated. Why I find, like struggle to be in loud places, why I was so withdrawn as a kid, like being so inattentive. Like, it's validation, but I'm not getting so attached to the idea that I'm putting everything into it. I'm not putting all my hope into the ADHD diagnosis, and in turn, I'm hoping that the medication might be helpful for me. And if it's not, then I just have to continue living the same way that I have done for the past 28 years. But at least I know what I'm dealing with, right? Like, so I'm not so attached to it that I'm putting everything into it, and like life's going to be absolutely rubbish if I don't get a formal diagnosis, even and I don't get medicated for it. Like, there's other ways to go around that, I'm sure, but anyway. So you can see how attachment shows up in so many different ways just from this little conversation that I've just had, and I'd like to circle back to like celebrating little things. So, talking about the person that I've been teaching for a while, celebrating the fact that she's actually quite flexible now, and she definitely wasn't before, as she says. So yeah, like, celebrate that, you know? Celebrate the little things, celebrate the wins. And one thing that I've been really celebrating recently is I'm so happy about this. Like, as I say, ADHD, scattered head, so fucking all over the place. And there's a lot to remember in yoga, even for an hour-long yoga class. The teacher has to remember an awful lot, or know an awful lot, you know? So you got to think about the sequence of the postures, and if you're teaching vinyasa and they're changing the sequence every single time that you do a class, you've got to remember a new sequence every single time that you do a class. You've got to come up with a new sequence every single time that you do a class. You've got to know that sequence inside and out, and you've got to know how other people's bodies might adapt to it, and how you might need to modify it to make it more intense, or modify it to make it less intense, or for certain conditions. Like, if someone, for example, if someone has had a hip replacement on both sides, someone who comes to my classes has had a hip replacement on both sides, so a lot of the postures won't look the same, won't be the same, and he just straight up can't do them, and that's fine. It's absolutely fine. I just offer him something else. But I need to know who's coming to my class, and this is just an example. I need to know all of this stuff, so much stuff, and I also need to teach it, and I need to move through it and demonstrate it and show and be adaptable to any variation that's going to come up. So obviously, as you can imagine, as I am, I like to have a notepad. I like to have my notes, which at least if I get a little like brain glitch, I can look down and say like, all right, okay, we're doing this pose, and then that's where we're going. And 2 weeks ago, I just had this thought. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to take my journal to class tonight. I've been planning it in my head for not for a few weeks, but in the past couple of months, I plan everything in my head, like the day before. I guess this is one of the wonders of ADHD, I suppose. I start thinking about it a few days before, and then I start to plan it in my head, like a key sort of focus that we're going to work on. For example, maybe it's like twists, or maybe it's back bends, or whatever. And I'll start planning little segments of it in my head. And of course, I'm at the point now where I've taught a lot of classes, so I can pull things from here or there, or like have an idea on the spot so we can adapt it and stuff. But I thought, you know what? Let's not take my journal today. Let's not take my notepad, and see how we get on. And admittedly, at the start of the class, I did say to everyone, you know, I don't have my notepad, so there's a very high chance that it could go fucking horribly wrong. But we'll just see how we get on, and, you know, we'll all survive, so it'll be absolutely fine. And that's the attitude I tried to go in with it. And I tried to not think about it too much. But then afterwards, I was like, fuck, I just did that. I didn't need notes. Like, I didn't need notes. That's the first ever class in almost 4 years where I didn't need to have a notepad or something, like a safety net. Like, I fully trusted myself enough to teach this class, to go through this hour without a backup, like without a contingency plan. Because fucking hell, I stuttered saying it just now, but because I believe in myself, because I believe that I can do it. And fuck, that's huge for me, being able to believe in myself, to be able to do something. Like, what the hell? Fucking amazing. So in regards to this, would I not celebrate that because I don't want to be attached to that feeling, or I don't want to be attached to the idea that I can teach without a journal or a plan or this or that? No, I'm going to fucking celebrate it. Why? Because it feels good. And yeah, I'm not going to get too attached to the feeling, but I am going to savor it because life throws a lot of hardships our way. So every little fucking piece of joy or thing that we can celebrate or be appreciative of or grateful for, we have to fucking celebrate it. And that's really important. So there can be this conflict of like not celebrating our wins and this and that, as I've said, but I firmly fucking believe that we should be celebrating every little win that we can get nowadays. And yeah, you probably heard that. The cat's getting quite hungry. It's, believe it or not, it isn't actually her food time. She believes it is. So yeah, we should be celebrating all of our fucking wins. And I think even the fact that I'm still teaching after this long is an absolute fucking win. I think that every day that I wake up and continue to go on with this journey, with teaching, with practicing, with living, that's a fucking win. Like, you know, from the places that I have been, every day is an absolute fucking win. It really is, and it should be celebrated. And it might not feel like that every single day, but that's the truth. Like, you know, we show up, we continue. Sometimes the journey can be absolute hell. It can feel like we're getting dragged through a hedge backwards, and that hedge might be a gorse bush. Like, it's just, it can feel like absolute torture. And every morning you wake up and you might think, fuck's sake, this is brutal. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do anything. And for me personally, to be in a place where I am now, with a totally different attitude towards life and a totally different attitude towards the medication that I'm on, for example. Like, I never accepted medication back in the day because I wanted to do it all myself. Because I had this idea that I could fix and heal myself. Excuse me, which is absolute bollocks. Well, I can, but and I will continue to heal. I don't think I'll ever be fully healed because I don't think anyone is ever fully healed. I think it's a process, and it's just, life is an experience, and it's something we're experiencing, and we need to stop labeling everything as much, I believe, and just experience things as they are, and how we experience them is totally different to everyone else, of course. So celebrate the way that we experience things, because that's unique, and it might be hellish at some points, it might be hellish all the time, but it's unique to us, and there's a purpose for that. And I have got I've not gone too off topic, but I'm trying to pull it back to where I was going to go. So I guess we need to find that balance of celebrating our things, but also not boasting about them, like not becoming too egotistical about them, like saying like, oh, I can do the splits. Excuse me, my throat's for some reason just decided to go. But yeah, like not showboating and this and that. Like yeah, of course we could show off a little bit here and there, but like let's not rub it in people's faces that we can do something that they can't, you know. Let's just be mindful of our conversations, and let's be mindful of how we share our wins and stuff. And of course we can share and we can celebrate our wins in silence, and we can share them with people that we love, like closely, and we don't need to plaster them all over social media. But we can of course celebrate our wins and things that we do well. But bearing in mind, all of the stuff that I'm talking about is from a very biased perspective. So I've lived with a very negative mindset for a very, very long time. So even being able to celebrate my wins is a huge deal for me. So it might come across differently from someone who's never had that negative mindset or negative self-talk or negative narrative. And once again, it's all subjective. It's all to do with how people perceive things. And just a little side topic, but one thing that has totally radicalized my thoughts on this is I think it was Tara Brach and her radical acceptance or something, but it might not have been her, I can't remember, but it was essentially that other people's thoughts are none of my fucking business. My business is my business, and their business is their business. How they perceive me, how they think of me, that's their fucking business. Nothing to do with me. You know, and this is how we sort of radically need to, or in this context anyway, it's a sort of radical acceptance of the self, and radical acceptance that like your business is yours, no one fucking else's, and no one else's business is yours. So there, that's it, done. Like, don't stress. Basically, don't stress about what anyone else is saying. Live your fucking life. And yeah, that's pretty radical, but you know, that's the way it is. And well, it's not the way it is, but anyway, I've totally got a bit lost here. I'm gonna round things off because the queen has dictated that she needs to get fed. But yeah, I guess, non-attachment, something to ponder over. And maybe we are attached to ideals about ourselves, or maybe we're attached to certain things, or materialism, or objects, or the fruits of our labor, postures, blah 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 blah, like anything. We can attach to absolutely anything. Even a look, like, oh god, the cat's falling on the microphone. Even our looks, we can be really attached to how we look. So I practiced non-attachment at one point by shaving my head. I noticed that every time I looked in a reflection in a car window, I started like looking at myself and like not admiring myself, but like just like fixating on the way that my hair was, and it had to be a certain way, and this and that, and like, oh god, I didn't like how my face looked, or how much facial hair I had, or this or that. So I shaved my head, and I was like, fuck it, that'll do, you know. Doesn't fucking matter. I've got nothing to think about now, and I can no longer be attached to this idea of how I look. It turns out now I actually really wish I could just shave my head again, because once again I've become attached to the idea of how I look, but not so much, not as much. But that's quite an extreme, or not. Actually, no, it's not that extreme at all. It's something to think about. How attached are you to the way that you look? Yeah. And maybe that's quite big. Maybe it's quite small. But non-attachment, have a think about it. And celebrate the little things. As I was saying. Yeah, celebrate the fucking little things. Because one day you might wake up, and that was a big stutter. Might wake up and you hate everything. So practice that gratitude and practice the appreciation of that. Life's pretty fleeting. Oh wow, that was a big one. And yeah, celebrate the little things. And once again, thank you very much for listening. And actually, you know what? Another thing that I'm celebrating? This fucking podcast. I would never have thought in a million years that I would have a podcast and I would be talking into a microphone, or at least sharing my thoughts and opinions with others, because I used to be such a terrified little person and just anxiety riddled to the absolute max. So this is beyond huge. This whole thing is beyond huge for me. All of the stuff that I'm doing is beyond huge, and I never ever thought I would be able to do it. I used to hate getting up in front of the class. My heart used to fucking race. I used to sweat. I used to stutter. In school, obviously, that's what I'm referring to as a class. Actually, yeah, at the start of teaching as well, fucking stutter, anxiety, heart racing, panic, a whole lot. So yeah, this is huge for me. So celebrate the little things. And celebrate the big things. Let's just fucking celebrate all the time, shall we? And one last note is that I have not finally, but I've always wanted to sort of sell some merchandise sort of things, like clothing and stuff like that. But I wanted to do that we all know that I have quite a what's the word? Ethical sort of stance on things like the environment, for example. Like every time you book into a class, I'll plant a tree, all that sort of stuff. And I really think that we should all be looking after the planet and not wasting things, etc., etc., etc. So I wanted all of the merchandise and the clothing to represent that, and it was quite difficult to find. However, I've managed to do it so that nothing is wasted. It's all print on demand, therefore there is no stockpile of clothing that is printed just waiting to go to customers, which is very good for me because I don't have that big a flat. And yeah, and all the products that I have chosen to sell are either organic cotton, 100% organic cotton, or 50% remilled cotton. So that is essentially cotton which has gone back and been shredded and made into new fibre to make another t-shirt. So all of the t-shirts and the clothes that I sell in this store, the Breathe Better store, are designed to be circular. So they will go back once they are needing to be remade, and you will get store credit for that. And every single time this happens, it means that instead of going to landfill or going to waste, that the very thing that you're wearing can be remade into something else. So it is completely circular. Now the warehouse and the company that does this for me is supplied by 100% renewable energy. All of the packaging is completely sustainable, and no plastic whatsoever, which is absolutely fucking fantastic. Now there's a couple of t-shirts and clothes that I've made which the profit for that goes towards certain environmental impact. So either every single time something's bought, I'll plant a tree. However, some might restore like a meter squared of wildlife and wetland habitat in the UK. One and another t-shirt might remove or fund like 100 kilograms of reduction in carbon emissions, for example. So there's certain t-shirts that might have a certain impact as well, so have a little look out for that. And the biggest one is the Peace for Palestinians tee. Now there's a tee on there that is all of the profit is going to the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign for all of the work that they're doing with all of that. So I won't say too much more about that. And of course, if you just want to support me, there's some little t-shirts and stuff with just my logo on it. So yeah, that really deeply would appreciate if you have a wee look there. And a really cool mug if you like mugs. Not that we all don't have thousands and thousands of mugs, but a really cool little self-meditated mug. So if you've ever been a substance abuser or an addict, that's quite a nice one if you're a meditator now. And I think it's absolutely fucking hilarious, and there's a little cute cat and a UFO on it on the back. So yeah, have a look. And once again, thanks very much for listening, and you will hear me again soon. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.